Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Knocked Conscious. Today, I had the absolute pleasure of speaking with Bobby Azarian. He's the author of The Romance of Reality. It was an amazing conversation. We spoke about myriad topics, amazing discussion. We went a little woo, but we went a little woo. So, I hope you enjoy it. Here it is. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. My head's still buzzing. Enjoy it. Bye. Cool, man. Well, very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for gifting your time, man.
Yeah, my
We have a
pleasure.
lot to
Nice to
talk
meet you
about.
too. Yeah, I mean,
um,
it's all kind
well,
there's
I'd
science to talk
love to.
about, but there's the world's
eh,
crazy too. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to start a little bit back to your Rogan episode, if I may,
sure.
because you mentioned a person whom I came across totally differently, and I think this is where synchronicity and everything that we're going to talk about kind of blends in, right? The reason we're all connected.
Yeah.
You mentioned Howard Bloom, and I met Howard through I've not met him personally yet, but I've had about 5 or 6 podcasts now with Howard, from Palestine to science to Michael Jackson,
Yeah,
all the running the entire gamut. And I
I was
love that
watching a
you
little bit of
mentioned him.
those. Yeah, I was enjoying those, like,
Yeah,
right before our conversation, checking those out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, so tell me a little bit about your connection with him, if I may, and then we'll certainly get into everything that you have to offer for
Yeah,
us.
Howard's awesome, isn't he? Um,
He really is.
so I have a friend named Justin, and we've been friends for a couple decades, kind of science and philosophy buddies. And we have a little group. We met on a message board back like in probably 2003 on MySpace, way before Facebook. And MySpace had these cool groups, like these kind of group discussions, which was kind of like a Reddit, I guess, of that age. And some were called like The Edge of Knowledge. I think that's the one we met on. And yeah, so while I was writing the book, he was like, this reminds me, some of the stuff you're saying reminds me of this book, The Lucifer Principle by Howard Bloom. And it's this kind of big history, cosmic evolution book. And I hadn't heard of him. And then I checked the book out, and the book was really popular. And I was reading a lot of it. And I was like, wow, I got to meet this guy because we seem to be on the same path towards cosmic truth, I guess you could call it. And so I reached out to him when the book was done, asking him for a blurb, and he was nice enough to read it and to give a blurb for the book. And I just started learning more about him. I started coming to his he has the Howard Bloom Institute, and they have these meetings, these weekly meetings. So I go to
I
those
was asked to
sometimes.
be a part of that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun group, and there's great
Yeah.
discussions. One time we filmed little question answer thing, and I love Howard because he's this cosmic philosopher. For anyone out there who hasn't read his books, one's called The Lucifer Principle, one's called The God Problem. He has one coming out called The Sexual Cosmos, I think is the name. And it's
He is
it's
crazy
really
about that,
really
yeah.
exciting. Yeah, yeah. So I've looked at it, and it's very similar to the book I'm working on right now. And he's also interesting because he was the publicist for Michael Jackson, Prince, like Bob Marley, David Bowie,
You see the guys in the background, Billy Joel, Bob Marley,
Freddie
you see these guys,
Mercury.
right? Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. Everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Michael
that's
Jackson and Me. Einstein, Michael Jackson and Me was another
yeah,
book
that's
we wrote,
another book.
and
Yeah.
that's how I actually came across was I actually interviewed Michael Jackson's nephew, Taj Jackson,
Oh, that's cool.
about the shenanigans around Michael, and I watched Leaving Neverland on HBO, and I was very compelled to believe that, and then I
Yeah, I
saw a
haven't seen
counter
it.
documentary that basically debunks all of it, and it's very interesting
Interesting. So it's very hard
watching.
to get to the truth.
And what's interesting is watching the overlay of like a Rupert Murdoch who's in power
Yeah.
laying over that story. For example, in 1995, AJ Benza had testified that there was going to be a Harvey Weinstein story allegation in
Really?
1995, 20 years prior
Wow, that's interesting. I gotta check that
to
out.
the actual him getting caught, right?
Yeah.
So AJ Benza was paid by Harvey Weinstein to put a Michael Jackson article in instead, and he testified to that.
Oh, so it was just kind of a random filler article, like, just to get
And it
that
was fake,
story
and it
out.
was a lie.
It
Right,
was just like
and it was to cover up Weinstein for 20 more years, and I mean, it's just weird how it all comes together, but once again, I think
I
this speaks to the synchronicity of you and I connecting.
yeah, I've been really interested in, like, analyzing different conspiracy theories, and because if you take, like if you think about epistemology, which is like the study of knowledge, and you start thinking about like the world in terms of we have a statistical model of the world encoded in our mind, and we're trying to get at certainty, but there's always uncertainty. There's definitely going to be things that we don't know about. So the question is, how much do we not know? Like, how transparent is the world? Are we seeing it as it is, or all are these there? We know that there are definitely things that we don't know about, but the question is how much. And I've been interested in stories about conspiracy theories about Michael Jackson's death being intentional and a way to silence him because he was being very critical, as was Prince, about the way the music industry is run and the way artists basically aren't treated right and they're not given their fair share. And that when someone dies, all that royalty money goes to the labels. And so with the wake of the in the wake of the Puff Daddy scandal, when you
And
start
actually,
looking
do you know that connection with Puff Daddy?
well, I
Are you
mean,
familiar with the
I was
connection
gonna
with Michael
I was
Jackson?
gonna say all of those people up top, like Jimmy Iovine and Jay-Z's mentor, Leor Cohen, I think is his name. And
Yep,
like there's a few
and Fat
people at the top, and they've been aware of lots of nefarious stuff going on in the music industry. And you
right.
can't help but wonder like what's been orchestrated, like Tupac and Biggie. I mean, their deaths, like
Right. And
it's they're saying that Puff might get charged for the
for
Tupac
jukebox,
murder,
I think, right. Yeah,
and
I heard
so
that.
maybe the name has been killing people and collecting royalty money.
Yeah, so I'd love
But
to
I don't
talk
know.
with
I
you
mean,
about that, and I think you and I mean, that might be a start of something great because I actually delve into conspiracy theories as well from both the debunking side and just the intrigue of what's the psychology that makes someone believe something or trust something or
I
not
think
believe
they're so
something, so
interesting, and
yeah.
I've written articles from the perspective of neuroscientist who does cognitive psychology research. Like websites have been interested in like, oh, write about what's going on right now, cover what's in the news. So conspiracy theory kind of that topic, like with when Trump was in office and there was the Q stuff going on, I had to look into that to write the article. But when you go down that rabbit hole, and it's interesting when you're a rational, principled, and I'd say Bayesian thinker, and that word just means you look at all options and you actually map out like the evidence for all of the theories, and then you try to come to some conclusion based on what you know, but you actually go through the process of giving every theory the benefit of the doubt during the evidence collection part. You could call it epistemic foraging, like you're searching for bits of knowledge. And when you do that, it may not turn out that the conspiracy theory is true, but you find out a lot of stuff in the process about other things, maybe about that, and you realize our society has this massive blind spot because basically the word conspiracy theory has, rather than being a theory about a potential conspiracy that's a crime, which we know happens, um, it's become a word meaning a theory that's fake when there's no
And
way
that was
100
actually done by the deep state. They actually planted that as a fake thing. They made it like the woo word, like woke. They made it like, made it toxic by doing that.
anybody in power who doesn't want to be questioned about what they're doing in secrecy is going to benefit from having the word conspiracy theory have this blanket definition where it just means ridiculous things. And it's really stupid for anyone to believe that, you know let's say poor people go to prison all the time for organized crime. We know crime's like a big part of reality. To
That's what
think
the
that,
government is, by the way. It's basically organized crime
well, I
and
was going to
spreading
say,
awareness.
to think that elites are people in, higher status people, wealthy America doesn't participate in organized crime, that they're all angels, law-abiding citizens, and only the unwealthy people in the world are the bad people. That's pretty messed up, biased thinking. So there's a lot we don't know about, but we have to be really careful at the same time, because if we're wrong, it can have really bad consequences for people's lives. But we
Well, that's where the
shouldn't we
Bayesian
shouldn't
comes in,
just
right?
put
That's
that's
where
where
we have to we have to
exactly.
eliminate those probabilistic outcomes
Yes.
and come to and it's interesting to that extent. It's kind of like the world's an equation. Everything's an equation, right? And the more fine-tuned we can get the beginning of that equation, the more fine-tuned the answer becomes. So the more accurate data getting in, we can get to from point 1 to point 0 1 to point 0 0 1 and just fine tune it more and more to get a more accurate
Yeah,
outcome.
exactly. So the way I like to think about it is that we have this, our mind is a mental model. It's a mental map of the world. And there's all this uncertainty in the model because there are all these things we don't know. And the process of living and learning is filling in the details of that model, filling in the gaps and reducing your uncertainty. And the more you can reduce your uncertainty or ignorance about the world, the better you can navigate it, and the more causal power you have, the more power you have to influence the world, but just the more knowledge you have in general, usually the more successful you're going to be in life. So we always want to be doing, I dropped that kind of big word, but I think it's a good one, epistemic foraging. It's basically just like
I
hunting
love
for
it.
knowledge all the time. We need to do this. And in today's age, like we have to do this with everything. We have to be curious. When an assassination attempt happens on a president, no matter who it is, no matter which side they're on, you
Yeah.
have to
Hey,
have,
just
like, you have to
and just so you
ask
know,
all
I was
questions.
I was in Las Vegas at Freedom Fest when Robert F. Kennedy just spoke the night before. And I actually
Yeah,
want to
and
talk with you about I want to talk to you about the attempt because we have some woo things to talk down the road. I promise you.
it's always fun.
Um, like it's crazy because you've just recently spoken with me. You can tell I can tell I mean, you can tell that I am a lucid thinking, thoughtful individual, but I've had experiences that I'm trying to understand. So I hope we can talk about
I
that.
love that.
But
That's
please
always
finish your
fun. Yeah,
point, and then I'd love to get in just a little synopsis of Romance of Reality, and then maybe touch, on the worldview part and your new book and stuff like that. But
sure.
please finish your point. But I just wanted to interject there. We were all at Freedom Fest. I'm talking about we had Steve Forbes there, and we had Brett Weinstein and Michael Schellenberger I spoke with for 15 minutes. And this news comes across about the assassination attempt, and everybody's buzzing about it. I mean, we're talking about political thinkers here, and we're all talking about it for
Yeah.
the last 2 days. So it's
Oh,
been
that must
amazing. And
have been
right off the
interesting to
bat,
see
false
that
flag, right?
response. The
Right off
way
the bat,
it
the
was,
first, all of us libertarians think false flag like that. So
and that's a bias too, but I mean, you have to consider it.
it is, but
We
we're
don't know.
Bayesian in the fact that
You didn't
I
rule it
didn't
out.
make that accusation. I asked the question, right? I didn't
You
make the
should always
accusation,
be
but I
able
asked
to
the
ask the
question.
question. And when people tell you you can't, something's fishy there.
Absolutely.
So it's not
So
the way you
tell him,
figure it out
yeah,
isn't so much it's not just looking at the evidence. It's also when you make a claim like that, looking at the response and making predictions, saying, okay, let's say I say this, how are they going to respond? What would be the typical response if this is true? What would be the typical response if it's not true? Um, what would be the typical response if they don't want us to know whether it's true or not true? And yeah, there's no transparency right now. It's just a really bad state of affairs. And speaking of RFK, it's messed up that he doesn't have Secret Service. That is really strange.
it is.
And
But let's see how great they did. Look how great a bang up job they did. I met the actual personal detail for RFK over at Freedom Fest. I trust those men in way more with my life than I do any stranger from some political ideology or some deep state that's protecting me. I'm
I
not
bet
gonna
they're
lie.
I bet they're yeah, I bet they're great. But
They were
he
awesome.
has to pay for
Awesome.
that out of pocket too, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, he should have it funded for
yeah,
him,
you
but I'm
should
just
have it,
saying
but
like
he's got the
this
best guys. Yeah, yeah.
right. The Secret
That's good
Service
to
isn't
know.
exactly. I'm not going to any organizations from the government anymore to looking for answers. You know what I mean? I'm trying to become a lot more self-reliant.
Yeah, and the whole investigation being done about the assassination attempt should be like an open thing. It should be a cross department thing, and it should be like a publicly transparent thing. But it's
Yeah.
not, and until it's not,
Here-
people are going to have conspiracy theories, and they can't be blamed because people aren't being transparent. You want to get rid of
Yeah.
the conspiracy theories? Make everything transparent.
Right. I mean, Biden just says, let the FBI do their job. Are you kidding me?
Trump
The
is going to
FBI
gut
called
the
parents
FBI.
terrorists 2 years ago.
The
The
F-
FBI called parents terrorists 2 years ago, and he wants us to trust them with the information they get. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
mean, I gotta admit, I don't know how much we can trust, our government and our agencies. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt for most things, but I
We
do know.
should. We should
Well, and
also.
I don't know if we should. That may be too generous.
Well
I don't
well
know. I don't
well, I
know.
mean, yeah, I mean,
But for
I'm on the other
now,
side of it. I'm a kind, disagreeable person. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I'm on the side definitely leaning more on the side of 90% of it is balderdash,
yeah,
but I still wanna be compassionate because I do wanna allow them to become transparent, right? So I don't
yeah,
wanna just attack
exactly,
them
exactly.
at every angle.
Yeah, but so, we have to recognize the fact that, they're mortal enemies now, and a lot of people are gonna lose their jobs if Trump becomes president that are in those organizations, and Trump's probably gonna be out for revenge at some point, even if
And
he
that's why
says
he
he
named the vice
isn't.
president right away. That's why he named JD Vance as the vice president.
Yeah, I that's something. Yeah, I saw that, and I've been
It just
hearing his
happened
name,
today,
but
yeah.
I don't know much about him. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I need to learn more, like,
I'll fill you
about,
in,
like,
no
the
worries.
this strategy. Yeah, you can fill me in. But, a lot of people, their livelihoods at stake, and so there is a natural motivation to, do whatever they can to keep Trump out of office.
And that's the
Um,
same thing with keeping Biden in office, because the people that are keeping Biden in office, that's their meal ticket.
yeah, and once.
If he goes out, then they get replaced, because that's
Yep.
how you do it. Administrations get replaced, so they don't wanna lose their jobs either.
And once people are in a self-preservation mode, then you can't trust them because they're doing what they
And they're
have to. I
capable of
mean,
doing almost
they're doing
anything.
what's biological too. I mean, they're gonna do what's if everything's on the line and it's their life, like, yeah, we don't know. So I don't want to speculate too much, but um, no, I mean, the point is we have to speculate. Like, I don't want to
Right, that's the thing, I
not
wanna
give them the
actually
benefit of the
speculate
doubt, but
everything.
you gotta ask all questions. Yeah, and they
Right.
need to be
I don't wanna
transparent.
speculate conspiracy. I wanna speculate everything. You know what I mean? To be
Yeah,
clear with
and
you, like,
yeah, exactly. So that should always be allowed because when people say don't ask questions, yeah,
that's when you have to ask
that's when you
questions.
have to ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you for sharing that. I think we might have a future about conspiracies because I actually do delve in some in my podcast, and I'd love to talk about those
Well, I would
psychology
love,
things in the future.
yeah. One project I've had in mind is kind of taking a Bayesian approach to the different conspiracy theories. Like, let's say you take the top 10 or top 20. It's kind of like a MythBusters type show where you're
I would
busting
love that would be
conspiracy
awesome.
theories, but in the process of trying to bust them, you're going to find out that, okay, when you look at the evidence, yeah, actually,
Never true.
the stupid people are the ones believing the narrative. One I saw that got me interested recently was the death of Soundgarden's Chris Cornell. A lot of people die, and I don't question it. Matthew Perry, for example, from like I kind of saw that coming. But if you look into the details of Chris Cornell's death, it is super sketchy. Nothing makes sense. Um, so there's a
But
lot of
I would
things.
love to talk about that one because I'm a huge fan, and I just missed
Yeah,
him in
he was
Phoenix, and
great.
I didn't go see him,
Ah, that's so
and
sad.
I heard the night this is interesting because I actually did a podcast about suicide. I lost a good friend to suicide at 27,
I'm sorry.
And actually, that has a woo component too. Once again, probably either a conversation for another day or later down the road. But um, Chris Cornell and the guy from Lincoln Park, they were very troubled. But I heard that Chris Cornell was super happy the day that he did it. And I've heard stories of people who commit suicide when they've made that decision that they feel free. And I found that to be one of the interesting counters to possibly what you were saying. But I would
Yeah.
love to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? So yeah, and you will probably never get full certainty on that, but some of the details are really interesting when you look into, for example, with suicides, there's not usually like blood splattered around the room and stuff. There were strange injuries like on the back of his head. Lots of stuff
Well,
that
speaking of suicides, let's go into the Clintons, for example. Come on, how many? Foster on the park
I'm almost
bench, and the
scared.
guy who
I'm
shot
almost
himself in
scared.
the chest twice,
I'm almost
hanging.
scared to talk about that stuff.
I know, but
I'll just
those are ones where we
you'll
look
be
at. And
emailing me for the next podcast, and you won't get a response, and you'll know why.
I
But
promise I won't
yeah,
talk about that. We can
the
talk about flowers and rainbows and sprinkles if you want. I
I
promise.
will say the journalist that reported on the meeting between the Clintons and the Attorney General that happened right before the election that everybody found out about and probably cost
He was
Hillary
in
the
Phoenix.
election. Yeah, that guy committed suicide
We can talk about that. 3
after
kids,
he wrote a book
healthy
about it,
marriage,
super
and he
happy,
had
and no
just
one at
left
work
Phoenix.
expected it.
He left Phoenix to go back to Alabama. I know him because he did traffic in my town in Phoenix.
Really?
Yeah, because it was in Sky Harbor where he broke that news. Yeah, he's a University of Alabama alumnus. Yeah.
Yeah,
Chris Simon, Chris Shield, Chris something. I
I
forget his
just learned
last
about
name.
that recently, but
Well, then we need to talk because I actually have the whole lowdown on that. No joke.
yeah, that'd be interesting. So there's some, yeah, in this hypothetical project of Bayesian conspiracy theory busters. There's some I probably won't touch because I don't want to die.
Yeah. I know a few as well. But I think I'm ready to do it. Let's go. Let's just, better to burn out than fade away, right?
You didn't
So
hear that
romance
from
and reality.
me.
No, not at all. No, you didn't.
Professional hitmen.
Bobby Azarian did
Don't
not
come out.
say
I'm
that.
not
I
going to say
promise you.
anything. Your secrets are safe with me. I just want to live
So
life.
romance, we got to go back to romance and reality because this is really where it launched. So tell me a little bit about synopsize that for me. And I do have an analogy. I hope it's an accurate analogy, and we can go from there.
Okay, do you want to give the analogy or do you want me to give
Yeah.
the
So
synopsis
you
first?
spoke of emergent properties. So the best analogy I use is temperature is only the result of molecules banging together faster and faster and more.
Yeah.
It emerges out of that process. It's not
Yeah.
a thing. It's the reverse causal, right? So it's a
It's a
bottom up, not a
collective.
top down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
kind of
collective
mentality.
thing. It's an emergent collective property of a system. It's yeah.
Right. And we see emergence being more bottom up in that way, not top down. Yet our whole lives we live top down from the hierarchy, from the Father, from God, from all these different hierarchies. We always seem to perceive top down. And I love that you perceive bottom up because with my experiences, I'm starting to find and align with your ideas on that. I'd love for you to share a little bit about all that.
Yeah, so The Romance of Reality is a book that tries to explain a lot of the biggest scientific mysteries that are most interesting to us as humans. So, like the origin of life, what's consciousness, how's consciousness created, and what's the ultimate fate of life? What's the ultimate fate of the universe? And it argues that we have the picture completely wrong right now. We have a scientific framework that's known as the reductionist framework that implicit in this view is the idea that the universe is just this kind of accidental machine-like system. And what I'm saying is it's a system that's evolving, and that evolutionary process isn't something completely random. It's a learning process. It's a process of knowledge creation. And the evolutionary process is not just the biological process we're familiar with, but it's a cosmic evolutionary process where nature's simplest components are assembling themselves into increasingly complex structures and configurations, and that leads to life. And the system that we call life on this planet is actually this integrated network of all of these organisms that are these agents that form these larger collectives and larger intelligent networks. So basically, the biosphere is like a distributed intelligence on the planet Earth.
And
And
to use an analogy there, we have the mushroom mycelia, right? With the roots in the ground, for example, with trees, between trees
yes,
that share information and share resources and things like that.
yeah. So life is just interconnected in all these different ways, and you see it with plant life, and trees are an interesting example because there's all this intelligence in like the root system, and there's
It's almost a physical personification of, or a characterization of the energy that we're talking about in the consciousness realm, right?
yeah, it's similar because there's information processing going on. It's like a mind, a distributed mind emerges from those networks, and the human civilization connected by all of our communication technology, you could see that as forming the global brain of the superorganism that's the biosphere, because we're analogous to neurons, where the most complex species, and we do all this information processing. So we've formed something like a global brain. So you have this planetary intelligence that's this these interconnected ecosystems, and they all work together to keep the temperature and the gas composition of the atmosphere in a range that's friendly for complex life and for the continued persistence and continual development of life, really the continual progress of life as a whole towards higher complexity. Not every species is getting more complex. The system as a whole is getting more complex, and the most complex species is getting more complex. And what I argue in the book is that the network of life, it's all of these what are called complex adaptive systems. So it's these systems that are continually learning from their environment and exchanging information. And this whole system is becoming increasingly resilient. So it's better able to deal with catastrophe. And that life is basically, it learns, it's basically nature is presenting life with all of these existential challenges, and it's encoding the solutions to the problems of survival. And through this process, it's gaining knowledge and it's becoming increasingly resilient. And so, what the book argues is that you can't stop this process. Um, it's constantly life is constantly adapting and evolving to where it just gains more causal power over nature. It's better able to manipulate nature. It becomes harder to kill. If an asteroid's coming toward the planet with our technology now and it threatens all of intelligent life, we can destroy that with our technology. Um, if we had to. And so basically, it's this self correcting system that slowly, but at an increasing rate, starts to expand through the universe. And then it's an interconnected system of intelligent agents because they're in contact through communication technology. And so the evolutionary process is building a distributed intelligence that will someday be at the cosmic scale. And so this represents a process of the universe organizing itself. So the universe is a self-organizing system in this view, and it's becoming more self-aware through the emergence of conscious organisms. And then those conscious organisms form this ever-expanding network that is this intelligence that's basically taking in all of the inanimate matter in the world, and it's integrating it into its computational network. So the universe is in this process of being transformed into one cosmic entity, one cosmic intelligence. And the French philosopher and paleontologist and evolutionary theorist he wrote a book in like 1940 called The Phenomenon of Man. He had this theory of evolution being progressive and going towards what he called the omega point. So yeah, it's just the idea that the universe is a self-organizing system, which doesn't sound that radical. And a lot of scientists would say, I think it's fair to characterize it that way, or it could be. But when you push it to its logical conclusions, then everything is on this trajectory towards an omega point, and the evolutionary process is essentially building God. It's building this cosmic intelligence that we're all going to be part of, all the conscious agents that are still alive when this is constructed.
Yeah, that is amazing. So on that, I tend to think that we are adapted to the environment more than the environment adapted to us, but only initially, right? And then as the consciousness between things grows, then it becomes more symbiotic back and forth because it kind of gets feedback from us, right? But it doesn't initially know. It just creates an environment, kind of like physics, like the gravity, all the laws of our natural world. So it's interesting because we look at fractals and pattern, and it looks like all these patterns are starting to emerge at the micro level and at the macro level, almost exactly like these fractals. And they kind of fit whatever the laws of this universe tend to be. Or do you have any thoughts
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. So the whole process of self-organization that I described, it's like a growing fractal pattern, because basically it has these systems that are these nested systems. So people have called it like a matryoshka cosmology, those Russian tea dolls that stack inside each other. So you could think of the cosmic evolutionary process as nature's simplest components, like fundamental elementary particles, subatomic particles coming together to make atoms, which come together to make molecules, which come together to make organisms, which come together to make ecosystems and societies, which come together and make this planetary superorganism. And that biosphere extends itself into the cosmos through intelligence, through intelligent life, expanding. And it's just one growing network. But you're right, it's this process where you have the universe is basically this dynamical system, and there's this tendency towards order and a tendency towards disorder associated with the second law of thermodynamics. And there's a constant interplay between those two tendencies, and that's what creates complexity. So it's kind of an Eastern philosophy, like yin yang type of
Yeah.
relationship. And the Western
Yeah.
philosopher Hegel talked about this dialectical dynamic. It's how cultural evolution happens too. You get an idea or a worldview, and then the opposite worldview emerges. That's why there's always political polarization. But then there's eventually a synthesis of those worldviews into something that is greater and basically takes the best elements from both sides. But yeah, there's this fundamental interplay between life and its environment. And basically, living organisms have to continue this struggle for existence. They have to fight to stay alive in a world that tends towards disorder. But the tending toward disorder is only half the story. Life lives up to that challenge. It's always encoding the solutions that it finds to that survival problem, and that's what propels progress. And so, the living network is always expanding, and it's basically interacting with its environment, and the environment becomes an extension of the living network. And basically life is finding this harmony with the universe around it. And the whole process is kind of this ratchet that ratchets up complexity through these different dynamics, the dialectical dynamic and the Darwinian dynamic. And so you can explain exactly how nature is becoming more conscious through life. You can explain all the mechanisms. You can explain how conscious agents, are beings that have to model the world. They have to create a representation of the world. And then that model needs to constantly be progressing and being updated for the agents to be able to counter this tendency towards disorder, to be able to continue to persist in the world. And then you get a really interesting story where little bits of the universe, which we call organisms, because when you break organisms down, they're made of the same, fundamental atoms that the rest of the universe is made of. Um, you get these organisms that are basically the self-aware manifestations of the inanimate world. And so you get a world that's growing more alive and conscious through intelligent agents. And then you start to see us as having a cosmic responsibility. We're actually the stewards of this self-organization process. So our progression is nature's progression towards a self-aware state.
And as we are, at least as we know, the highest consciousness on this earth, that's what gives us that responsibility of being stewards of that consciousness, or to expand it exact and grow that. Is that kind of what you're saying as well?
Yeah, our cosmic purpose is waking up the universe, and we're part of this intelligent network that is the biosphere, but that's just the beginning of the process. So progress is going to basically, um, but here's the interesting thing. I'm saying progress is inevitable, like this is going to happen, but it doesn't happen without us trying. We have to exercise our
Right.
agency, our free will. But the
Right.
thing
Right.
is, we end up
Yeah.
doing that at some point because it's the optimal strategy for survival. So, what life needs to do to survive um, also helps nature wake up, but it's this kind of unconscious process that at first there's not really a consciousness to it in the way that we're conscious beings. It's more of an unconscious sort of computational process, the way AIs can do computation and seem intelligent without actually having a conscious experience. But then when humans arise and we realize our role in this process, then we start to guide the evolutionary process.
Yeah. So to that point, I look at people like Jordan Peterson with Chaos and Order. You have a certain percentage that must be ordered because that is what ties us to the foundation of the structure. That is what keeps us alive. That is what's worked. That's what conservative is. And then you've got that outlying percentage that is once again within that Overton window of range. Because if it's too much ethereal, we get lost in that and we don't hold on to the tradition and the traditions that keep us going. But we can't be too rigid because we don't adapt quickly enough to change when things change around us.
Yeah, the
So it becomes this
traditions.
constant.
Yeah, and I really like that aspect of what Peterson talks about because he's got that right. But what he
I think
hasn't,
he does have that right. That's about one of the things he's gotten right recently.
yeah, and yeah, so I'm writing an article actually about his conversation with this guy Alex O'Connor, who has a YouTube channel called Cosmic Skeptic. But here's the thing: I'm going to go further than Peterson on the kind of religious, like spiritual side of things. So I don't think he's fully recognized this teleological aspect to evolution, that the universe is waking up, that it's self-organizing towards something higher. And when you do see that story, there's a form of like the people who came up with this idea. So the philosophers Hegel and Teilhard de Chardin were people who really,
Desjardins, yeah.
yeah, were the first to talk about this. And they were Christian. And so there's like a sort of Christian cosmology that comes out of this, that if Jordan Peterson is going to talk about religion and use these Christian, these religious metaphors, which I think can be helpful, he should go all the way and embrace Teilhard's omega point theory, and because it reveals a lot more than just understanding that it's about this interplay between order and chaos. That's actually the mechanism that generates increasing complexity. And yeah, so you're exactly right. Traditions are, that represents order. It also represents our collected knowledge, like our adaptive knowledge, things that have worked in the past and that have proven useful to society. And some of those things are just useful metaphors. Um, but those patterns are real, and that's what Peterson talks about as well. They're the stories of the Bible represent these patterns of nature that do get realized in other ways, even if some of the stories aren't literally true. Um, and yeah, so we need a where c- conservatism represents our collective knowledge that we've built up over our evolutionary history. You still need to have this flexibility where you can change and update your belief system to be more in line with what we know today. So it is this balance of order and flexibility, but we shouldn't forget that our traditions are the consequence of evolution. Like they contain the fruits of a lot of trial and error, um, exploration, experimentation by humanity. We don't want to throw all that out just because we don't believe anymore that Jesus actually, was resurrected and came back from the dead. Um,
Right. Yeah, and
so
to that point, to that Peterson point is, what I'm starting to find from him is he's not talking about the God as an entity, but as God being the concept of the best, goodest outcome in each certain situation. That's how I read the stories in the Bible, for example.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's a useful way to look at things. And I just go even farther and say that this evolutionary process is actually building God. That nature is synonymous with God, the creative principle. Um, that this interplay between this tendency towards order and disorder that creates life and drives life towards higher complexity. And that to me, that's the most spiritual thing you can imagine, because in this story, we are actual expressions of God and expressions of that creativity. And then we have a certain amount of free will, which means we are like vessels of God. We have that creative power. And if you believe the story of the self-organizing universe that I've been describing, intelligent agents come together and form this cosmic scale intelligence. So that conscious agents right now are literally in God's image, if that's true. We're sort of little mini gods, like micro versions of God. And
Yeah.
it sounds pretty radical, but people like Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of engineering, he is clearly,
Singularity.
yeah, the singularity, but that's just one stage. He has a great
Oh,
graph where it
absolutely.
shows the waking up of the universe. Like ultimately, it becomes the technological singularity, though, is the moment where intelligence becomes self-improving. And
It's
once
exponential at that
and
point.
and once that happens, you can't stop cosmic spread. Like you
No,
can't stop
it's
life.
a, like a runaway train in this. It really hits a tipping point for sure.
Yep.
So
And so a
on
lot of
free will.
complexity theorists
Oh,
yeah, a lot of scientists have recognized this, but they haven't followed the spiritual implications. And I kind of left that out of the first book. I just kind of alluded to them, but the second book, the book I'm working on, is kind of going through the history of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, and showing that if you look at the history of philosophy and religion as one human project of trying to understand the universe, you can find all these concepts that map onto this story, and they kind of pop out at you, and you see that there is a universal and true objective story here, and it's actually extremely spiritual because it gives intrinsic purpose and meaning to life to help the universe become like self-realized, self-actualized, and that we're not these, meaningless accidental systems. And for me, it kind of fills me with infuses like life with like purpose and meaning, and kind of like a playful spirit too. Like basically the
in a fun way,
in a
like
game
we
like
can
way,
actually
yeah.
experiment, right? Like we can experiment and test and then find the best outcome, not by being rigid and strict or not by being completely ethereal, but by by using our logic and our reason and stoicism and all these other things to come up with the best answers.
Yeah, and it's up to us to even define what's best, like what's optimal. It's an open
Right.
question, so you kind of choose the rules of the game, but there are certain constraints, like you must get energy, you must get food, you have to have
Right.
shelter. But yeah, to
But I love the human experiment. We look at the United States, Thomas Jefferson, right? We we talk about perfect. Everyone wants a perfect life. That is an impossibility because in my opinion, the only way you can experience something is to understand its exact opposite contrast. Contrast is how we see the world. We don't know what
exactly,
good is until we know what bad is. So,
exactly.
in order to know what perfect is, we'd have to know what the opposite of perfect is, and I don't think anyone could endure that to get to what perfect is. So, what I love about even the United States concept, a more perfect union, it
Yeah.
never says a perfect, it's just to more perfect. It's always to improve, to constantly adapt and change and make more perfect, but obviously striving for that. But we know we'll never get there.
Yeah, that's this theory makes that explicit. It basically says it's this never-ending process, and it's good because if you got there, what would that mean? It sounds like that would be the end of progress. You have to have these
Right.
problems to solve to push
And
progress forward.
we don't get good feedback by hitting the goal. We get it by reaching little things toward the goal.
Yep.
That's another Peterson thing that I think he got dead on is, I just invested in this whole bunch of time and equipment into this thing and it's over now and I'm almost breathing, but like I've now that's where my work begins actually. It's not
Yeah.
over at that point. But a lot of people get to a goal and then they think, oh, they can stop. But that's not where the excitement comes. It comes with like, oh my gosh, I got to talk to this next person that I've been trying to talk to. Oh my gosh, I got to shake this person's hand. I got to ask this person a question. And it's the little steps towards the largest goal of that accomplishment that really keeps us going and provides purpose and meaning.
Yeah, totally.
So, okay, so free will. You mentioned free will. I have to mention them. Let's go to the four horsemen, right? Sam Harris. I'm assuming he's the reductionist of which one of the reductionists of whom you speak. He because he talks about free will
Yeah.
being not really a thing, right? So could
He's
you
just
tell me a
he's
little bit about your thoughts on free will and then what your thoughts and how they contrast his thoughts on that perhaps?
yeah, he's just kind of confused. So he's in between
Thank you.
reductionism and emergentism. So what he does is he conflates biological determinism and physical determinism. So there's a kind of determinism you see in the inanimate world with like inanimate objects follow classical mechanics or Newtonian mechanics. So you can use pretty simple formulas from Newton's laws to predict where an object is going to go. If you map out all the forces that are acting on it, you can know basically the path of an object. But you can't do that for organisms. So organisms have what's called agency, so they are more autonomous than inanimate objects. It's a process that can be understood. I mean, it used to be really mysterious. Some biologists were what's called vitalists, where they thought there was this kind of supernatural force animating life, and we find out that there is
Oh, like a
something
puppet on strings kind of basically?
more of like some kind of flowing essence in living systems that propelled them towards goals where inanimate
Okay.
objects didn't. So yeah, Aristotle had this concept of entelechy and teleology. Henry Bergson is a French philosopher, had the concept of the élan vital. And they were right in the sense that organisms behave differently than inanimate objects. But then we start to learn that organisms, what's special, it gives them this agency is information, like this adaptive information they've encoded through evolution, through this learning process, and also this control, cybernetic control. It's kind of like life can use feedback loops. Life kind of uses chaos and self-amplification to kind of be able to control the environment. They're like these living
Well,
loops.
it provides the pressures for evolution to be forced to happen, right?
What's that?
It basically provides the pressure for evolution to happen, right?
What does?
That last part that you were saying. It provides the pressure to make change happen or to help
Yeah,
humanity.
so natural selection is like the selection pressure that weeds out all of the dysfunctional designs. So yeah, exactly right. There's like a this constant pressure between the environment and the organism, and so natural selection is needed because it's kind of optimizing the design of life. But so we learned that organisms are these like computational systems and they have this autonomy because they're these kind of computers, but they're not just it wouldn't be accurate to like reduce them to the computers we have because we also have minds. And so
Right, and the emotion part.
we're conscious
Right.
computers, we're like emotional computers. So that brings a spiritual quality to computation. It's not just computation, it's a conscious agent that's a control system. And there are deterministic processes in the brain as well. There's a lot of stuff we do automatically. So we have this like program, and that program has been sculpted by our evolutionary history. So there's instincts that we have that are genetically encoded, but there's also a lot of stuff we learn. We learn a worldview, and that kind of programs us too. And we have certain behaviors given certain inputs. Um, so when Sam Harris makes the argument against free will, he doesn't make this distinction between physical determinism and biological determinism. So we do have freedom in a way that all organisms have freedom in a way that inanimate objects don't have, that some people will just grant them free will for having causal power. So it's called causal power. There are these higher level causes. In the old view, everything was just, if you look at everything as particles following mathematical trajectories, you get this kind of idea of a pool ball universe. Like everything is like a pool ball, and it's all of the molecules are just following these mathematical trajectories. But what we really find is that these things, these computational architectures emerge, and then the whole system gets control because it's this system that's taking in patterns through sensory information, and it's understanding that it's an agent in the world, and it's using those patterns, stored patterns, to make predictions about the future. So we have free will because we have agency. We have causal power over the world in the way inanimate objects don't. But then you might ask, well, is it, how free is it when you say free? So sure, we have will, we have this autonomous behavior, this self-driven behavior, but how much freedom is there? And so then you start to think about biological determinism. Like there are these bacteria that are really simple. So they'll swim away from toxic substances and towards chemical food. They'll just, if they sense um, food, their tail, their flagella won't wiggle, but if they don't, it'll wiggle. So there are these little simple programs. So there's not much freedom in that behavior, but they are agential. They are moving towards survival goals in ways that dead things don't. Like you see life and you're
Right.
like, wow, it has agency. But free will, I think, to say, to earn the title of free, that comes when you have a certain level of self-consciousness, and then you can basically,
That's the awareness of being aware? Is that what you would call consciousness, or what would you
yeah.
call that exact level?
So the awareness of being aware, I think, is self-awareness. It's just kind of like a meta level, like a step up. Like you're not just aware of the world, you're aware that you have a mind, that you're an agent in the
Yeah.
world, and that you're
And you
conscious.
can almost see you can almost picture yourself, you can even picture yourself or imagine yourself in, like, 3rd person,
Well,
1st
that
person,
yeah. So
from different angles.
that's
Oh.
that's an awesome distinction to make. So that's exactly where I was going. So I
Oh, so
think there could.
there we
No,
go,
no,
cool.
no, I'm glad you said that, because that told me, okay, this is like a meaningful thing to add to that. Um, is that, and maybe it even counts as another level of awareness. So I've called this meta awareness. So that word is used sometimes to mean self-awareness in the literature. Um, but basically, there's an awareness that you're an agent that's part of a larger network of agents that themselves make an intelligence. And so that's when you get that kind of like perspective, like almost godlike view or drone-like perspective. Excuse me.
Right.
And so
Can we pause for
we
just 1 second? Can we
yeah,
pause for 1
sure,
second?
please.
I have to use the restroom. I'm very
Okay, yeah.
sorry.
Well,
My voice is dying. I've been, like, dry for, like, days trying to do this whole thing, and, like, I've been hydrated like crazy.
no problem.
Thank you
Good
so
for
much. I'll
you.
be
Yeah.
right back. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So, we're getting this top-down God theory piece. Okay, this is exactly where we're going. Let's talk simulation. Okay. So,
Sure, but
go ahead.
yeah, just to say one more thing about free will. So when we
Yeah.
have that
Oh,
perspective,
please.
then we can see all the possible trajectories, then we can choose our path out of the menu of possibilities. So a certain level of awareness brings free will into the picture because you can literally choose between different possibilities. You can also use consciousness to imagine possibilities that don't exist yet. And that's
And that's
true.
another Peterson point
That's
where
true
he
freedom.
says the idea is everything can die in an idea versus in actual trying to make it happen, right?
Yeah, there's a
And that's
selection
where the
process
chaos
there too. Yeah.
if all the ideas become facts without being tested for their durability or their fragility or their anti-fragility, then that's not good for us because it could collapse around us, right?
Yeah, so the evolutionary process that we're talking about, the self-organization process, it we're used to thinking about it happening at the level of organisms competing and some dying and some um, existing and making copies of themselves. But it happens in the world of ideas too, the world of memes. And Peterson talks about memes and says Dawkins hasn't gone far enough. But yeah,
Right, but at least
there's
he
a
started it. I mean, he started with,
yeah,
the
yeah.
selfish gene, right? So, he invented meme. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's way more to that literature than Peterson knows because I saw him saying things where it was, clear, like people like Dennett and David Deutsch have really thought about this. But yeah, there's a
I'm
natural
huge
select.
into Dennett, by the way, and I'm so sorry that about his passing, and I saw that at least he and Peterson got to talk a few weeks before his passing, which was
Yeah, I
special.
need to go back and watch that. I got to meet him and talk to
It was
him.
good.
Yeah, I bet it was. And yeah, that's really interesting.
You got to meet him?
Difference of views. Yeah, my friend, has, like, kind of a consciousness AI discussion group, that's an Air Force group, and they invited him, uh, like, maybe a year ago, and I got to ask him a question, and we talked about this kinda stuff. Yeah, it was really neat.
Oh, that's
Um,
special. Yeah, because he's actually my of the 4, he's the one that's lost the least amount of luster over the years, I guess,
who's
if
also
that
who's
makes
kinda
any
what?
sense. Of luster over the years.
Yeah,
Like
who
a lot of they've
did it?
I think Harris has gone a little TDS on some things, and I think that, Dawkins has gotten a little UK imperialistic about some other things, and I think
Yeah,
that obviously Hitchens, I'm kind of an anti-theist, and we'll talk about that for sure, because it's not what many people think. People think I'm like anti-God, and it's like not that at all. To me, theism is the human interpretation of God, and my anti-theism is with what I've experienced. I don't know what it is. I only know that the human translation of it is 100% not correct.
it's
And
too
I
superficial.
and it became institutionalized through the Catholic Church and all these other
Yeah,
institutions, and institutions we find are fallible because they're human. And I've always now looked at the direct connection as the true source of how to do it, because it has to be spoken in your language. You're the only one who understands your perceptions. And I will talk about some of the things that I've experienced as well, because like you said, you talk top down, or at least that's how we get the top down philosophy, right? And to you and I think we're at the thought that consciousness becoming emergent, there was a base reality, right? There was a start, emergent property. I think we're actually on a multiple iteration of this consciousness emergence, if I
that
may.
that could be true, and yeah, that's what I'm writing about in my new book. I kind of read that
And
in the so, but wait,
yeah,
I thought
and that's where the consciousness comes. I'm sorry, that's where the simulation theory comes back around, if I may, because if I may kind of describe it how I perceive it from my experiences is consciousness emerges, we get races and biological entities that have millions of years on us, or even thousands of years. They don't need many more. I mean, look what we did in 100, right? I mean, imagine if we focused and didn't have war, and we just focused on technology or advancement or betterment,
we
and there
could
was a society like that exist.
we could
Imagine where
demilitarize
they'd be.
tomorrow. We could
Right.
demilitarize
Right.
tomorrow and put all of that money into funding progress, and
Abs-
it would be insane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So imagine that. Imagine a society like that exists, and then they are now there's that there's that universal consciousness that we spoke of, and now they are that next creator of the next base reality. Right? It's kind of like turtles all the way down, and we keep talking about that. So I use God. This is my concept of God. I call it the place from which everything came. And by using that statement, there's no argument from anyone. If I go up, do you believe in the place from which everything came? Most people they might have a name for it, like God or Big Bang or whatever, but the concept of that is seems to be universal. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
something like
that's
that?
beautiful. That's perfect. That's like you set me up to like knock it out of the park. That's like what
Here you go,
that's what that's
softball.
what
Here you go. There you go.
that's what my next book is about. So, um
And I
yeah,
didn't know that, by the way,
now
but I
let
am
me
psychic, just so you know. So maybe that's why I know that.
and now let me let you down because my answer isn't as good as it should be if I'm
No,
knocking it out of the
no,
park.
it's okay.
No, this is something I'm working on. I'm trying to understand it myself. Um, I'm trying to learn from religious philosophies and understand what this story of cosmic self-organization is better. But what you find out when you start looking for correspondences between this theory and religions and Western philosophy, um, is these are these universal concepts that you alluded to. So in Hinduism, there's Brahman, and Brahman just means it's not really a personal deity, which you seem to be kind of like that's what you're pushing back against with religion in general. It's more of this concept of there being this meaningful whole, this totality from which everything emanates, and what the German idealists, there were some philosophers in the 18th and
Oh,
19th
that's why I'm so good. My
century.
parents are German. That's how I know this.
It's yeah, it's in your genetics. I
It's in my blood. Anyway, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I'm half Persian, and it's in Zoroastrianism too. It's and I sometimes I feel like, huh, if our ancestors, there is, like epigenetic imprinting, like if they did have this concept in their culture, you could very well be kind of primed to think this way. But with the German idealists, so Hegel and Schelling, Hegel being the most famous, they had this idea that the universe, that nature was basically in this process of developing or a process of becoming, and that it was becoming self-aware through self-aware agents like humans. Basically, the story that I've been telling this whole time was what the German idealists had come up with. But they had a concept called the absolute. And the absolute was the same thing as what you described, and it was the same thing as Brahman, but where Brahman is a little bit more vague. It's just supposed to be like, reality in its totality, and everything comes from that. The absolute is something that is evolving and developing and manifesting itself like in more complex forms, and through those forms, they come to nature comes to realize itself. So it's the story of cosmic
So it's an
evolution.
absolute. It's an absolute in the direction it's going, not an absolute in a fixed way.
It's always evolving. It's not this fixed
Right. So
static thing.
because
So
a lot
it's
of people think of absolutes as like it's fixed, right? But this is absolute in its progress of expanding.
Yes, it's everything. So it's reality in its totality, but that reality is transforming and developing, and it's moving towards a state ultimately where it understands itself. So the absolute is the story of the becoming of Brahman, and the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, I think the French pronounce it Teilhard de Chardin, if I'm being fancy. He had this concept of the
I'll
omega.
lift my pinky when we drink our tea. I'll make sure.
He had this concept of the omega point, which he understood as being the cosmic Christ, like the point at which this higher consciousness emerges, and that was kind of the resurrection of
And
Jesus.
in the
So,
woo world, they do call it Christ consciousness. They do call that Yahweh, Christ consciousness, and things like that.
yeah, so these ideas are kind of scattered throughout religion, but if you look at it from the perspective of this self-organizing cosmos story, where humans are the self-aware manifestations of this creative principle, then you get Brahman is the whole totality of it. It's the self-organizing universe. The Tao is sort of the organizing tendency of Brahman, becoming more complex and more organized and coherent. And the story is basically one of Brahman becoming the cosmic Christ through conscious agents, basically reproducing, like proliferating, and then coming together to make this cosmic scale distributed intelligence. And so there's another concept in Hinduism aside from Brahman. So Brahman is everything, but there's also individual consciousness, and the name for that is Atman. But there's this, principle in Hinduism that says Atman is identical to Brahman. And that's what the German idealists were really saying, is that the absolute is everything, but it's basically evolving, and it's creating these self-aware systems, these organisms that allow it to experience itself, and that this process is headed towards a more perfect state. And what's interesting is there does seem to be a moral arc to this process. As organisms get more intelligent, we become more aware of other agents. We recognize that it's all an interconnected
Compassion, for
system.
example,
We
emerges,
become
right?
more compassion with when we develop a theory of mind. So when
Yeah.
we develop a theory that other things have other minds,
Yeah.
we naturally
Or-
become more compassionate. So there's a moral arc, and that concept comes from Zoroastrianism. There's this concept of Asha. And so Asha is kind of like this ordering principle that's similar to the Tao and Brahman, but it's specifically also related to ethical progress. So if you look at Eastern religion, you have these religions that kind of explain deities as personified cosmic functions, um, and not even really personified so much. They're just mapping cosmic functions.
Well, if
And
you think about it, look at the Roman gods. They were functions of acts, right? Like god of war, god of agriculture. So they always personified an act or an action or some kind of meaning, I guess, in a
Yeah,
way.
so you could construct like a meta religion that takes the things that map onto the dynamics of nature, and you basically get concepts from all of these different religions, and you can see this kind of evolutionary development in Eastern and Western philosophy. And yeah, the Greeks, they're the seeds for all of these things in Greek philosophy. And then you have a picture of a God like you described, where everything is seen as part of an interconnected whole. But we don't know if this universe is the beginning of this process or another iteration. And if we are one iteration, then we could be the creation of an intelligent agent, just the same way that we're starting to create digital virtual worlds with agents. And you could imagine creating a program. If you don't think computers are conscious, there's neuromorphic hardware. You could imagine a certain hardware that has biological architecture. You could even use biology. You can string cells together and you can start creating
Look at
intelligent.
Neuralink, right? We have
Yeah.
Neuralink where we're starting to become transhuman anyway, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's where this process is inevitably heading, that we merge with our technology. And that's what allows us to basically like expanding through the universe becomes something that doesn't seem impossible once that merger happens. So even though people are scared of that merger, it's going to happen over
It's
time.
gonna
It's going to
happen.
be a seamless transition too. I think there's a way to do it that will be painless and just
Yeah,
natural.
but money's involved, so it's not gonna be painless. It's gonna be
It's
that, the tops are gonna get it and get that advancement, that
Yeah,
divide get
there
bigger,
will be a day when I think
right?
all conscious agents will have the ability to have life extended basically indefinitely. But you're right. Right now, the people with the most resources are going to be the ones that get it, and they're racing. But I mean, if that's true, then
Be
in a way
before I
they're the guinea pigs. So I mean, maybe it's good in a way.
It's true.
But
Yeah, not
so
so bad, right?
yeah, and if our universe is another iteration of this, then there is a God, there is a creator. So there could perhaps be some sort of intelligent agent that created this world. But for me, then you still have to ask where that agent came from. So ultimately,
Right.
the deepest explanation is just that reality has this fundamental tendency towards life and consciousness that just keeps
Yes.
growing. And then that's where you derive all the meaning from.
Right, and to your point, once again, we do talk turtles all the way down. What made God? To the same point that you're talking about is I do think there was a 0 point, like a Big Bang type piece where everything was quantum entangled, and I'll explain that because that's where we go into the woo stuff. Um, but that's all quantum entangled, and that was the first iteration of this base reality. That was ground zero. That was patient zero. And then that did become it to your philosophy, the emergent property. And then that created the first God that then created the second iteration of the base reality, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's where I
So
think we might be at multiple. So it still didn't, to your point, it doesn't have a starting God. It just followed the patterns of evolution. But then that next, when it did become universally conscious, then it allowed for the next,
yeah,
base reality 2.0.
yeah. So yeah, I think I have the same view, and the way I try to describe it when people have that something for nothing, how do you get something from nothing question, is that maybe nothing is inherently unstable. Maybe there's just this tendency towards higher organization, um, that just explains where everything comes from. You just have to accept that there's an organizing principle in nature. So, but the way you described it sounds like it could explain how organization came about from this universe, in this universe. But yeah, it just makes me wonder whether there's been other iterations and whether there's a deeper base reality, and whether that same explanation, when we're talking in terms of quantum stuff, whether that still applies. I think it probably would in some general sense, but I keep it a little more general and say, like, yeah, there's just inherent stability in a state of nothingness. and a reality that expresses the totality of possibilities is also going to have something in addition to nothing. But yeah,
Well,
so
we talk about Lawrence, gosh
Krauss.
darn it, who's the yes, Lawrence Krauss in the Origins Project, right? What doesn't space have? Space isn't nothing. It's composed of stuff. It's not nothing. It's not a
Yeah,
vacuum,
so
right?
that's where I kind of was trying to probe your explanation further because it sounds kind of like what Krauss talks about.
Yeah,
There's kind of this quantum ground of everything that spontaneously order emerges from that, but that's presupposing a different kind of existence where there's this sort of quantum foam reality where there's still laws too, and that's been a criticism
right.
of his thing. So
Well, it
where
could
does
be. Well, if
that
it's
that
quantum
maybe that's not
probabilities, it
the
could it could create all the multiverses with different laws in them, like physics and gravity. They all, dark energy has a different number than the dark matter does, and gravity is a different constant, and things like that. And that's where the test universes come out. And then law of natural selection, the universe that works or that adapts within it, within those laws, are the ones that survive.
yeah, there's cosmological natural selection theory that says that every time there's a black hole that forms in the universe, it creates basically a baby universe on the other side that inherits the constants and laws of physics of the parent universe, but with some variation. And through this process, you'll get universes that create life, that are friendly for life, because basically the conditions that lead to universes that create a lot of black holes, those universes with stars, are more likely to give rise to life. And then if intelligent life can engineer these universes, then that growing, evolving multiverse starts becoming mostly populated with universes that lead to intelligences and universes that basically go towards these omega points. So I think that might be the right answer, but I still think when you look at that process, it's still inevitably producing life and complexity and consciousness. So to me, there's always like a spiritual aspect of it because it describes a universe that's moving towards consciousness ultimately. And I don't know if you can ever get a fully satisfying explanation of why nature is that way, but when you recognize that that's the way nature is, as opposed to a system that gives rise to life, but it's only transient and it fades out, and we fail in our dream of expanding past our star. Because when our star dies, if we don't get out of the solar system,
Right.
the planet's not going to be habitable. So, yeah, it's always mysterious, and that's what's interesting about it. But I think the explanation you've converged on is like a new type of spirituality that's basically not that different from Eastern and Western religion, but it's looking at it in a more rational way, and it's not placing so much importance on literal interpretations of stories that were meant to teach people principles that would be useful in life.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to keep up with you. I swore today if I stumbled, I was like Biden. I over prepared. I swear I over prepared. I didn't. It's not because I have dementia or anything.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's been great. I'm a little spacey. It's a little bit later in the day than I usually do podcasts because we're in different time zones.
yeah,
But
I know, and I'm really gracious for the time, and I'd love to touch into this before we go because like I know we talked for a long time. I hope this compels us to have another conversation because I what you just talked about,
yeah,
your
well,
conspiracy thing, I would love to be some part of that in some way. I mean, in some way contributing because I've actually done debunked, and I just love that, and I love those kinds of things. So
it would
let's
be
go into
really
woo.
cool to do it in a
Oh, sorry.
really responsible, systematic
Absolutely,
way. I'm just worried.
100%.
I'm just worried that it's going to lead us towards things that people don't want people to know.
I don't care. No,
Um,
I'm actually I seek truth. So this is what happened. If may I share my woo, if I
sure.
may?
Yeah, I love I
Okay.
love these
So
stories.
everyone calls it woo. This is what I call it. I call it Fruit Loop and Wind Chimer. Okay. I'm not a Fruit Loop wind chimer. Okay. I'm okay. Um
I call it
I
Wu,
was
like Wu-Tang, W-U. So
oh,
W,
nice. Wu Tang. Oh, that the Wu
yeah.
Tang Clan would be the greatest podcast name ever. WOO Tang Clan.
Yes.
I'm getting that one down. WuTangClan.com. Where is it?
Well,
Hold on.
so Woo, WOO would be the stuff that's not real, the pseudoscience that turns out to be fake. But some of the Woo, the WOO, we'll find is real. If we did one of these kind of
Right.
Bayesian exercises, you don't know,
And that's what I want to share
but
with you, if I may.
there are tons of things that we've figured out that would appear to be a garage door opener would look like magic to someone,
Right. Well, Bic
to
lighter. Think
to
about a Bic
Newton.
lighter. That's one I
Yeah.
always use. Imagine a caveman going back in time and making fire come out of your hand. They'd either stone you or worship you. There's no middle ground there.
Yeah, so
You know what
some
I
of
mean?
it's real, and so WU
Yeah.
is the Woo that's the real Woo.
I like it. So on that, I was 13 years old and I was involved in a car accident where I was ejected from a vehicle. I had a near death experience and out of body experience. I recall hovering over my body. It was clumped like I was like in a fetal position, curled up on the ground, and I remember blue and red flashing lights.
Wait, how
That's all
old
I
are you
remember.
again? How old?
13 years old.
13, okay.
Fast forward to I'm 40 years old, and I'm struggling with life over time and getting more and more resentful, not understanding a lot of things. And I decided to seek help. So I didn't want to go psychology, didn't want to do psychiatry because I didn't want to be prescribed medication. Plus, in my humble opinion, I'm smarter than all of those people. I needed something
That's
different.
how we always feel, yeah.
All due respect. And I know, but it's one of those things where it's like if I can trust that I can admire and see something that I can aspire to, then I at least have something. But if I can't get that, I can't build
Yeah.
that trust, I guess.
Yeah, I
So
totally
I
understand
sought
that.
out neurolinguistic programming. I'm sure you're familiar.
I
I
am.
met a
I think
gentleman.
it's really interesting, and I imagine there's some stuff that people claim that's fake, but I also think language is extremely powerful and that you can completely do interesting things with how you use words.
Yeah. So I the person I picked, the reason I picked them is because they had a degree in quantum mechanics, nonlinear mathematics, applied mathematics, things like that. So I'm like, if nothing else, I can just buy a friend for an hour and talk like cool
Yeah,
science stuff, right? Like that's
yeah.
the way I saw it. So I walked into this guy's office and he looks at me walking in just his little room where I go to sit down and talk to him. It was like an introduction, try it for $35, one of those things or whatever. And I walk in and he looks at me instantaneously, sees like me scanning the room, and he cocks his head and he goes, "You're different." And come on, man, I'm midlife crisis. My midlife crisis, like I didn't really want to be here anymore. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be here anymore. So, like, he instantaneously connected with me. I mean, that's the perfect thing to tell somebody who feels different is, "Oh, yeah, by the way, you're different because you know." So he obviously knew. I think he just knew what to say, to be
Yeah.
completely honest. I don't think it was anything outside of he just knew how to
Well, that's a
break
skill. That's
that.
a magical skill in its own.
It is it's an amazing skill, and we'll get to it because I think there is a deeper component, but I do want to at least acknowledge what we can Bayesianly say is a fact that he knows what to say to have someone who's distraught coming into their office talk. So fast forward. I'm learning some things about my subconscious, learning things, getting better. He finally says, "We're going to do a guided meditation." I have never done a guided meditation in my life. I don't know what these things are. So I'm like, okay. He says, okay, you close your eyes, just relax, breathe. You're on the ocean, you're on the ocean and you're at the beach and you pick up a sapphire. Then you look up in the sky and you see this feather in the sky. And then you see these or sheets of glass spinning in the sky, and in them are visions like pictures, video. And so I imagine all these things. And in the sheet of glass, and Bobby, you've talked with me long enough just to understand I'm absolutely lucid. In the sheet of glass, black man behind a podium, 2015, looks to shake someone's hand to his right, looks to shake his hand to someone to his left, and I see a flash. And the flash to me indicated gun. I don't know why, I don't know why or anything. I never experienced anything ever in the history of my life like that. I came out of it and I had tears. And this is 2015, please mind you, and you could probably corroborate this, how the subconscious works. I came out of it. I looked at the doctor or the NLP guy and I said, I just saw Obama get shot. And I was distraught, completely distraught. Like I was starting to breathe heavy and I was like crying, like almost in the verge of tears. He looks at me deadpanned and he goes, that either happened somewhere else or it's going to happen here. No joke. Okay. Next Thursday, I come into his office and he goes, hey, remember that vision you had last week? You hear what happened last night? I don't know if you heard what happened yesterday. And I'm like, yeah, I heard something about some shooting or something. And he breaks down for me that Clementa Pinckney, the South Carolina person, was the
Mm.
man that I saw. And there's a video. He told me, I did not do this. He told me. So I went back into a video, April 2015. There's a video of Clementa Pinckney at the state Senate.
And it looks
He's behind
exactly as
his,
you
he's in a
imagined.
suit. He's behind a podium. He has this mannerism where he takes his hand and he brings it from his right to his left across his body all the time. It's the weirdest. I've never seen anyone have this mannerism, and the hairs on my arms stand up every time I see it.
Wow. I love
Okay.
that. I have a friend
Now,
that oh, sorry, I was just gonna say
no, 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 that's it. No, please stop.
with
Please.
the
You have a friend. Please.
a friend that is very rational minded too, when the, assassination attempt happened, the other night, they said that they had a kind of vision of that, like, just not, anything mystical, but they had thought of that, like that idea, like, came into their head that that might happen, and that was weird, and then I was kind of probing them, like, interested in it, and then they were like, "Well, maybe after I saw it happen, I just retroactively, like, made that memory." Like, they started to question themselves. And I asked, I was like, "It'd be really interesting to know, like, how many, like, you could somehow do a survey of everyone and, like, how many people had that image." Like, yeah, those kind of things really interest me because you start thinking about causality and how everything is interconnected. And John Wheeler, a theoretical physicist, did these experiments where he showed there was like this kind of backward causality, this kind of handshake through time where, um,
I
yeah,
think there
people
is.
people should
I
look
think
that
there
up.
is.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's kind of hard to explain, but
And the Merovingian is all
so
about
so is
causality. I mean, I love that part. Like in the Matrix, the Merovingian is literally describes the whole simulation theory at its best. It
I
really
yeah,
does.
I got to get deeper into the philosophy of it. Is that in the sequels?
Just in general, yeah,
Or
yeah,
is it in the
absolutely.
first
And we could
movie?
talk about it. Yeah, we could talk about it another time. But yeah, it's basically through just I mean, Matrix is kind of simulation theory, and it was actually a black woman who wrote the initial book that the Wachowskis kind of hijacked allegedly.
I'd be interested to see what book it was based on. I didn't know that. But,
Yeah, I'll share that info with you. I have all that because like I go wide and deep, man.
yeah, for the record, The Matrix came out before Nick Bostrom published his
Yes,
simulation theory argument.
correct.
Um,
And the book was written in 1980, actually by the woman, I think, if
hmm.
I'm not mistaken. It's really interesting. I'll share that information with you for sure. So, if if I may continue, I
Yeah,
get
there's more? I didn't know there's more.
oh, it's not that started it,
'Cause
Bobby.
that alone is pretty insane,
So,
yeah.
this is 2015. Now, since then, I get visions. I don't meditate anymore. I can't meditate because I'll go places. Uh, it's burdensome because I see a lot of darkness, and I've got a couple philosophies on it. I'd love to just I want to play. What I love about this is the thing. Let's be Bayesian about it. I love that you're just open to the ideas. And these are my thoughts. I have I've explained my experiences and I'll share a couple more with you just to solidify how like they're just some are fun, some are real heavy, some are light, some are, they're all over the place. But they're not controlled by
Can
me.
I
I don't
give can
it's
I
like I'm
give
being told.
a little bit of a Bayesian explanation for what you're doing? Um, it doesn't explain the experience, the fact that that happened So this isn't trying to explain away the experience, but it's giving some insight on what the brain does as a Bayesian system. Um, so that basically means it just makes predictions. It takes what it knows about the world, it takes the patterns that it knows, and it starts to generate predictions about what might happen. So when people are having these kind of like prophetic visions, it's collective human inference. And what I think is going on, and when I talked about philosophy as being like one and religion being one like grand project of humanity, it represents this act of collective human inference. So we're all trying to understand the world based on what we see and what we know. And we start making predictions about the nature of it, and we start trying to predict the future. So your brain is doing this kind of Bayesian exercise where it's constructing possible futures. But
Okay.
whether it's actually tapping into things that are going to happen, like how it's actually converging on real events, that's something that's not fully explained. But
Right. Well, there's
we
two
don't know
things if I may.
the extent of entanglement too. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying
Well,
to
that's
like
the point.
figure out how it could be working. Yeah.
There are two things, and once again, I thank you just for delving into this because I'm not telling you that my imagination is real. I'm telling you that I experienced what I imagined. I'm telling you my experience is real. I'm not telling you what it means because I don't know what it means, but it really is freaky. And I like I said, we have a lot of conversations down the road, probably all just in general to have chats. I'm not lying. It's crazy, but
I've
you had
had other people tell me these kinds of stories recently, and it's always really interesting to hear it from the people who are kind of skeptical minded and rational to begin with, because then you're like, well, they have no ideological motivation to believe in this kind of like certain things that it would be hard to fit into our current scientific framework, which makes it more believable. So
Yeah,
I
and that's
do
why I
appreciate
call my
hearing.
podcast "Knocked Conscious" because
Yeah,
I
it's a cool
literally was
name.
knocked conscious at that moment.
You
And
gain a
like I said,
higher
the
awareness.
floodgates open. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to use perception, like we talk about perception and how we translate our own world. This is how I got to this direct connection with God versus the institutionalized and this is how I got to my anti-theist philosophy. So there are two instances. I remember my last girlfriend, we were on our first date and we were talking about, if we were going to have kids, what we name our kids or something. And she said, I know what I'm going to name if I have a girl, I know exactly what I'm going to name her and no one would ever guess it. And I'm a pilot. And Amelia Earhart popped into my head. No idea why, but that's what I go, is it Amelia? And she like turns ghost white.
Freaked out.
But this is what's interesting. It was from Amelia Bedelia.
Okay, I
It
remember that.
wasn't Amelia Earhart. So, but I would not have understood Amelia Bedelia.
Yeah,
I only would have understood Amelia Earhart because I don't know what Amelia Bedelia like. That's not my thing.
yeah.
So it was already the even the image came to me and was perceived the way I would perceive it, not the way she
Like you got the
perceived
image
it.
from outside, but then your brain created a context, it created an
Yes,
explanation, which might not necessarily have been the real reason that it popped into your head.
right. And this is so weird because I honestly think it was a button pushed outward thought in. I know it sounds and I'll explain that in a second because I actually have something further, if I may. And I really appreciate you humoring me through these crazy times.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
I'm in a I'm in a guided meditation, about 10 other people with a psychic reader that I know who's a good friend of mine. Actually, I really went wide and deep for a while because I was really overwhelmed for a while. But we were in a guided meditation in a circle, and we were supposed to go a guided meditation to see loved ones in the past. Someone who's passed on. See someone. See your grandma or your aunt or somebody, right? So
Yeah.
so everybody's going through, and we're doing the guided meditation, and you hear it and they're talking you through it. And all of a sudden, I see this fine, thin glass with a gold rim on it. You know those beer glasses that are super fine from Germany? that had like 0.5 liter written on them. And, they're
Yeah.
just really thin and super gorgeous.
Mhm.
And then I see this pitcher of wheat beer, golden wheat beer being poured into it.
Okay.
And then from this side, I see a black smelting ball. You know those smelting balls where it's heated and then like you pour out the metal out of it?
Yeah.
And gold goes into the glass, directly into
Huh.
the glass. So I get a gold rimmed glass, golden wheat beer, and gold smelting poured into the glass, like Goldschlager, like the little flakes. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I can't drink this. This is useless. Now, this is during a guided meditation to find loved ones in the past.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm just telling you this because this is what I experienced. I don't know what it means, but everyone goes around and they're like, "Oh, I saw my grandmother," and I'm sitting here. I saw a picture of freaking beer and gold being poured into it. What the heck? Like, what am I going to share at the end of this, right?
Yeah.
So I want to go last. Like, I'm letting everybody go first.
Mhm.
Everybody's sharing these stories or beautiful stories of how they saw people in a meadow and fields, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even do this right. I can't even meditate right. Right. So it finally comes to my turn. I'm the last person. I go, I have no idea what this means. Not at all. But I explained it. I described it. The psychic medium is the person whose house it was. She goes, I can corroborate. She gets up and walks away into the back room. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, guys, this is what I saw. She comes back and she goes, before you guys came over, I was dusting the coffee table, and I used this. Goosh, Scotch liquid gold. I, I don't know how much more accurate that could be. Like, I had a meditation of seeing exactly liquid gold this whole time, and she used Scotch liquid gold to polish her table before we all came. There's got to be a connection there, but I can't imagine what that is.
Is it possible that you caught a glimpse of it before and then that
It was in the closet. She got it out of the closet. And thank you for asking that, because that is a great question. Possibly, yeah, possibly. But I have more. I mean, here's one. Here's the last one, and this is where the simulation started really opening for me. The simulation of the outward message in, not me getting it, but actually being outward.
there's a
I'm. Oh,
let me say real quick, there's a
yeah, yeah. Please, no, please.
theoretical physicist named Vitaly Van Churen who has this idea that the universe is a neural network. And he's actually expressed the idea of this possibility of this interconnection between like nodes in the neural network to where there's this non-local exchange of information and that you can become like a receiver of knowledge that basically gets like impinged on your mind
Like
from
the
the
Akashic records,
outside.
like the Akashic records and things like that.
It's like
Similar to that.
it's like a physical theory that has mathematics behind it that would be analogous to something like that. It's pretty wild.
Does Penrose talk about it too with quantum tunneling, or is it slightly different?
I don't know if Penrose thinks that phenomena like that happen, but I imagine he'd say that if we collected data and we found all of these reports and then it started to actually seem like that happens, that he would say, well, it's not surprising because reality's quantum at its basis. But yeah, this guy Vitali, he thinks I don't even think he calls it, he doesn't think the mechanism's quantum, but he thinks that it's something analogous happening at the classical level, and that he basically thinks like through like he has the same kind of model of kind of the self-organizing universe, and it's almost like the neural network is something that's like coming into existence through the evolutionary process, and as more there's like a hidden layer that you can possibly tap into where there's like exchange of information according to rules that wouldn't make sense with like normal thoughts of causality.
Right. So the last one I'll share with you, and then I'd love for you to just share a little bit more about your stuff before you go. And thank you so much for your time, man. And I really hope that we've started some kind of, at least communication back and forth.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun.
So my girlfriend can corroborate this one. I mean, it happens a lot of times. I'll just do stuff, but this one was a very direct one. I actually avoided a car accident, and I was in Arizona. We're on the highway, and there's an HOV lane, which is the outside lane where you can go for high occupancy vehicles, and I'm the one lane over from that, and there's a slight drizzle. There's a pickup truck coming up on that lane and rapidly, coming to pass us on the left, and something pops in my head. Trouble. I heard trouble. I look in the rear and I even said it to my guy. I said, man, that doesn't look right. Something bad's going to happen. Don't know why, but I just said it out loud. And it's interesting because it's not always, I get millions of thoughts. It's just whatever comes out seems to be where it finds the filter, I guess. Right.
Mhm.
So we start driving and all of a sudden I get an input to like, I start muttering almost like a weird channel. I go, no, that guy's in trouble. That guy's not going to go well. And I literally let my foot off the gas and instinctively put my turn signal on and move 2 lanes over.
Mhm.
And I saw a flash of the truck coming across our lanes, which is why I slowed down and just moved over, just 5 miles an hour, nothing crazy, but just like that enough. You know what I mean? Like I got like told to do that. We come around the bend and there's a car accident, and that guy shouldn't even have been involved in the accident, but he locked up his truck and actually came across all the lanes, came across in front of us, and I just came to a stop. And I looked at my girlfriend, I went, "We're good, right? Everything's okay?" I go, "I have no idea how that happened, but I was instinctively told to do that."
And she
And
saw that you guys
she was in the
basically
she's a passenger.
you saved her and yourself.
She was a passenger. I was in like in that really unconscious zone. You know how you're driving and like zoned out driving?
Yeah.
So I wasn't like focused thinking about where I'm going. I was just kind of like, and I think once again, the openness allows that to come in a way. So
Yeah,
your thoughts?
well, one thing that could explain it in a way that's less mysterious, but I still think super cool, and I think this is happening all the time and explains a lot of these reports, and it's something that we should be talking about. The brain is doing all this kind of inference, this Bayesian inference and this computational processing of sensory input at this unconscious level. The conscious mind is aware of only a little bit of that processing. So it might have been the case that something violated a pattern, some sort of behavior of the car, the way it was moving, some sort of trajectory that your brain just noticed at this holistic level, something is not right here.
Right. But it
And
but it wasn't that truck wasn't the one involved in the accident. There was an accident already ahead, which he got caught up in.
oh, okay.
See,
So,
so there was already a pile up ahead, which actually compelled him to step on the brakes, which had him come across. It like I said, he wasn't the one who really started the accident. He was just involved in it.
but
It's
hi but
weird.
but his
It's
but the but
crazy.
his behavior was also
Yes.
maybe a
It
consequence
was
of
definitely that. What alerted me to your
recognizing
point
a
was
pattern.
yeah,
So he might have saw something, and then you saw how he behaved in response.
possibly, yeah. And I do agree with you. I think a lot of it is some of us have this pattern recognition ability that's kind of part of the IQ, right? Like pattern recognition. Some people don't have it. So we're able to take pieces of information, connect them either loosely or even more specifically, and then come out to some kind of theory or hypothesis or something that we can then test.
Well, here
Unfortunately, we just can't test this stuff right now, you know?
yeah. There could be ways to test it, and that would be interesting for future science. For example, of a thing that I would consider woo, WU, and not WOO. So it's something that's real. So this would be two examples of mind reading, but once I explain it to you, then you're like, okay, that's a rational explanation. But I think this is going on a lot. So let's say some friend calls you and you have that experience where you're like, oh, for some reason they just popped into my head and then they called. And the usual skeptic explanation for that is this thing called frequency bias. Like, well, you're thinking about that person way more than you realize, probably on a subconscious level. And when they call, then you become consciously aware of it. I don't think that's what's going on in some cases. And I think some people have had a real compelling experience where,
I have
they
one of those. I'll share with you after. Yep.
so there are a couple things that could be going on when you understand the brain as being this kind of Bayesian inference machine where it's modeling things in the world, including other people and other minds, and then it's making predictions. So, for example, it could be the case that, let's say I met someone at a party 20 years ago and we had a discussion about, let's say we were drunk and we were talking about the show Twin Peaks. And then maybe we became really good friends and maybe we don't even remember that first conversation consciously. And then let's say there's a Twin Peaks
Marathon.
like a spin-off or a marathon. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Twin Peaks came back like a couple years ago. This might have happened with some people, but let's say they see a ad for it on the internet or commercial on TV, and without even knowing, that primes their thought of the other friend, and that friend might have seen something similar, the same commercial or an ad, and without even remembering that that's why they thought of you. You both were primed by a common stimulus, and then they called you,
Yep.
and then you never even recognize what is the causal like origin of that. You could also imagine, let's say that's for someone you haven't heard from a while, but maybe it's someone you speak to kind of regularly. Maybe like your mom calls you on Sundays and Wednesdays and Sunday mornings and Wednesday around 7 or something, and maybe you don't recognize that pattern because it's not really planned. It's just that she's off work on those days and maybe
Right.
has like a sort of routine. And then so
Yeah,
like
you don't talk about the actual schedule. She just happens to call on those times
yeah.
regularly, and
And
it
then your
just happens to be
brain
the pattern.
yeah, and then you might be registering a pattern unconsciously because we're learning patterns all the time. And then maybe they don't call once on time, they call like a minute late. And like you had the thought of them when they normally call, and then they call right after that. What I'm saying is basically we model other agents and then they become little characters in our heads and they have those patterns and those things where basically our mind is a community of agents and they kind of interact and communicate with each other. So there's a lot of room for like mind reading once we understand that we make these little copies of people in our heads. And there's a
Yeah, it's
whole
really
realm of science. There's a whole new world of psychology like that we can explore when people start taking seriously the fact that we model other minds and that our minds really are these communities of agents, and that we see that with our dreams. Our friends come alive in our dreams and they have their distinct personalities. All of that stuff's encoded. I can tell you one story, um, of something just kind of like a trivial story. I think I've had more stories. I've had some crazy stories, and I have to actually think about it to try to remember them. I imagine a lot of them are like weird enough to where like I haven't discussed them because I would think, I'm going to lose credibility if I talk about this. But this is just one example
right.
based on what we were just
Well, if
talking
I
about.
may, even just before that, just let's jump in there because credibility wise, we're discussing them because we don't understand or believe them.
Yeah, we're
We
just
just
acknowledging that
experience
we
them.
had an
I
experience like
mean,
that.
an artist, right? An artist who comes up with a movie, it's still out of their quote unquote imagination. What does it matter? It's still the experience of the art, right? Like this is like an interesting type of artwork in
Yeah, and
my
that's why I
opinion.
really need to write them down because I know I've had it, at least a couple times where things so weird have happened that like I'm like this. I have no rational explanation for this, but this is something that's not like that, but it's an example of how weird it is that we model other people's minds. What I'm arguing is that we can use this maybe as like a strategy for gaining something like mental superpowers. And I'll tell you why I use a provocative word like that. So, um,
I think some of
ultimately,
us have them.
yeah. Well, this guy Ramanujan. So ultimately, I'm going to talk about
Well,
the
it's
Indian
evolution. We have evolution
mathematician.
too, right? You know.
Our
Anyway,
brains, yeah, like our minds. There's all of these crazy things going on. We model other agents, and they're always kind of updating in our minds. So we definitely have like a community. When we make decisions, also, I think we think about subconsciously what the people in our lives would do or our role models given a certain situation. So we're always kind of decisions are made according to this kind of averaging, like a statistical averaging of all the other minds that you've modeled.
Yeah,
So
you just mentioned Ramanujan or something. Is that what
yeah,
you wanted to go to?
Ramanujan. So yeah, I'm going to go there,
Ramanujan.
but
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
so one example of this that I think is pretty fascinating is I had a dream and Bjork was playing in the dream, and Bjork's one of my favorite artists. But the song that was being performed in the dream was not any song in her catalog. It was an original construction by my brain. And I'm a musician too, so maybe it's less
Me too,
surprising
by the
because
way. I'm a
I've
singer, so maybe we can connect too
awesome.
that
Yeah,
way.
that'd be cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've made music that's, I attempt to make as brilliant as hers, but this sounded full on like the best, most, interestingly, intricately orchestrated Bjork song I ever heard, with her singing in like standard Bjork style.
Scandinavian or something? Or
Yeah, yeah, and just the quirks
yeah, and
of
her style, right? Like
her
like that
style, her
yodel or that
aesthetic.
kind of yodel
Yeah, it
thing. And
was weird and it was her. It wasn't something that I could consciously come up with in a moment. It's something that like would seem like it would have to be created by her brain. But what I think my brain has done is created this, model of Bjork through listening to all of her music, to where there's an agent in my head that thinks like her. And then suddenly I have kind of supernatural powers. I can create music that would be Bjork's best song if I woke up and I was able, if I had taken the time to like, because in this dream in particular, I woke up and I could still remember it. Like I had a sense of it. It's gone now, but I could have potentially written it, especially if that was something that was my profession and that like I like looked for opportunities like that.
they always tell you to have like have a piece of paper and
Yeah,
pen
like
at your
notepad
nightstand.
stuff. Yeah.
Comedians, anybody in the arts has to have that to write down because they wake up with epiphany after epiphany and they
Yeah.
just jot them down.
Yeah, and like Stephen King has written, I've seen when I was writing my book, and I have a novel that I've written that might come out next year. Basically, he said that it's kind of like these stories are there in their totality, and you're kind of like a paleontologist, kind of like chiseling away, like uncovering like a full structure that's like already there. Like when you were talking
Well, that's
about like
kind of like that's I'm sorry, that's Michelangelo's thing about David was there. You just chip away the stone to reveal it, right? Isn't that the same philosophy, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's literally what he did. It's pretty
Because I
interesting
think
how
that's a copy of that, right? I think Stephen
yeah.
King's plagiarizing. See, I'm not a big fan, so no, just kidding. But I think Michelangelo said it goes, the art is there. It's just we had to remove the stone to reveal it or something.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Plato-ish too. He had this idea of this theory of
Yeah,
form, so it's almost like there are these abstractions that are perfect in there, and they're kind of being impinged on our mind. And Roger Penrose, who you mentioned earlier, does actually he does say that in The Emperor's New Mind. If you look up in the index, like
yes.
Plato, he talks about how he thinks that's how mathematicians get their understanding of the world. So my modeling, my mental modeling of Bjork gave me these superpowers that abled my brain to construct this. If we had sufficiently advanced neuroimaging connected to AI, you could have translated that brain activity into the musical pattern, into the construction of the whole thing. I mean, the
Thank
like
you. Oh
some
my,
someday we'll get there and it'll be really interesting.
we are totally on the same, literally on the same brainwave. Because I was going to ask about fMRI right now. I'm
Yeah, it's
wondering if
not a
there are
it's not
psychics.
a it's not at that level, but they can
What?
reconstruct what you were thinking and looking at. Like, they did a
Yeah,
study
they
where
can
you're watching
reconstruct
a movie,
words
they
and they
can
can reconstruct
reconstruct it
images.
with AI,
So
they
I'm
can reconstruct.
wondering.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm wondering, once again, I have visions. I have a psychic medium who sees people. I have people who talk to people. That's what the claims are. That's what they experience. I'm not stating it's fact. But the fMRI would be interesting. I wonder if they could draw a vision of that or a
It
picture
would
of what
be
I did
super
see
interesting.
or
Imagine
the
you could do
words,
that.
right?
Imagine you could just, while you were dreaming, you have that hooked up and you have it hooked up to everyone, you could see if there were, like, collective
Yep.
dreams, kinda like that
That would
movie
be amazing. I think that's
Manipulator,
coming.
yeah.
I mean, I think
I
that's
think,
coming. So
uh, that would be really
go
interesting.
ahead.
Well, to wrap up, like, the last thing I
Yeah.
was gonna relate that to Ramanujan. So
Okay, cool.
Ramanujan had all of these crazy theories. There's some of his equations which weren't validated until string theory was invented. All of these crazy things that he had written down in this notebook, and he didn't find, he didn't discover these mathematical principles the way normal mathematicians do, where they have this systematic thing where and they construct equations that have proofs, and you can basically derive the truth of these equations from some proof that you've demonstrated that it's logically mathematically coherent. And so a lot of this stuff, like if you there, there's a movie about him, and if you watch it, you find out like the history, like some of this stuff just sounds crazy on the surface, but there were mathematicians it was either Cambridge or Oxford, like this one guy who was really well established, who saw that it wasn't nonsense, and brought him over there, and so he became famous during his lifetime, but he died pretty young. I think he got pneumonia or something, but he left behind this book, and since they're not proofs for some of the theories that he constructed, people didn't know what to think of him. And then we find out like 100 years later that he was right about all of these things, and no one knows how he was able to generate these ideas, because it's not the normal method that any mathematicians use. And it seems like the biggest missed chance to explore the psychology of the most interesting psychological phenomenon. It's too bad he wasn't this people didn't push at this point more, but he was asked like where did he get his ideas from, and I think he was kind of like shy about, like, he didn't want to tell any of the people at the Ivy League school the real answer, because he'd sound crazy. But he said he would get the answers from his god, Namagiri, who I think was maybe some sort of manifestation of Shiva, like somehow related to Shiva. But he had a Hindu god, and he would either have visions or dreams, and he would get these mathematical insights from his god. And what I think is that it's possible to model abstract deities, and then you start to think like they think, and it can actually lead to
Wow.
like information that would be
Epiphanies.
godlike. Yeah, epiphanies. And
Wow.
then
That's
that leads
brilliant.
me to think that we could playfully construct these deities and like start to mentally model them, like what would be their characteristics, how would they think, and then our
That's
subconscious or our
so
dreams could
smart. Yeah,
start
because you literally
revealing
putting
things
yourself in
to
the
us.
shoes of great, like, it's like if you put yourself in the shoes of Superman, you could lift a car, right? Like that same kind of like mental overcoming of whatever that
If you
or
you thought you were
cosmological.
Superman and you lived life like that, and you would, yeah, I mean, if
And
you,
we've had people do supernatural
I
feats
mean,
like
I feel like,
strength and like
yeah, people like David Goggins, I feel like they probably use strategies like that. I mean, the power of
yeah.
belief drives you to have a certain tenacity that can basically make whatever you believe kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and Ford even said, he goes, "Whether you believe it or not, you're right."
Yeah.
Right? Whether you believe it can happen or not, you're right. Because if you don't believe it can happen, you're definitely not gonna make it happen. And if
Yeah,
you
the
believe it
belief
can
thing.
happen, you probably can make it happen, right? So, I know you've shared so much time with me, and I'm sure we're gonna talk again. Do you wanna touch up on your new book and the quick worldview piece before we close it? Because I'm just so grateful for the time you shared, and please tell us how we can get in contact with you, and we can close on that and call it a night.
Yeah, check out my Substack, Road to Omega. So it's basically the theory that the universe is headed towards a self-aware state called the Omega point, and that point is reached by like the continual progress of life and the kind of expansion of intelligent agents outward into the cosmos, creating this integrated intelligent network that would be something like a cosmic mind, a distributed mind the size of the universe. That's already happened to some degree on a planetary scale. We formed this thing that's been called by Teilhard de Chardin the noosphere. It's kind of the collective intelligence that emerges from the human civilization connected by our communication technology. And so it's called Road to Omega because basically self-aware agents, like once we become conscious of this process, then we we're a part of the process, and becoming conscious of the process is part of the process itself. And then we have to direct our actions. We have to live in such a way to continue this process and help the universe wake up, or allow, enable
We have
nature
to pay it
to become
forward,
self-realized.
or at
Yeah,
least pay it back.
we
Yeah.
do. Yeah. I guess it's, yeah, paying it back and paying it forward. And so the view is one where life has this meaning and purpose, but the way I'm framing it, I'm first of all mapping the story onto concepts from Eastern and Western religion, but then I'm taking those concepts and showing how it's the story of a cosmic game. And Alan Watts is a philosopher that saw this parallel between Eastern religions and also
Mhm.
looking at it from this game type perspective. And when you look at it from that perspective, life becomes kind of psychedelic, and not just it's not just that it makes life trippier, but you start to be conscious about your goals and the way you act. So it's kind of like a system for self-optimization. And the way you play the game best is realizing that we're all in it together. And so we want to basically convert what are called zero sum games, which are competitive games where there's winners and losers,
Mhm.
into positive sum or non-zero sum games, that are cooperative games. So basically, we're all in
Right.
it together, and to solve the existential challenges we face, all the nations have to come together as like a coherent whole under this meaningful and purposeful worldview. I think this is the worldview that can do it by basically showing a correspondence between universal truths between all of the religions, and then turning that into something like a game. But it's not a selfish game, it's a cooperative game where we understand that what's good for the individual ultimately is also what's good for the whole, and vice versa. And we really need this mentality right now more than ever, because we're more divided and politically polarized than we've ever been in recent times. And the good news is that those conditions, all of that chaos, is kind of what creates the conditions for a worldview like this to emerge. It's part of this process of finding solutions to problems, this evolutionary process. So I think this worldview will have success. It will inevitably be the worldview of humanity, but we don't want to go through a disaster and a civilizational collapse to learn that a worldview of unity is the right one. So we're on a trajectory towards collapse, but the trajectory also favors adaptive agents that recognize and this trajectory, and avert it. So the trajectory is one of progress, but progress occurs by humans trying to avoid disaster. So yeah, that's what the new book is about. Basically saying that the evolutionary process is spiritual because it's a process of nature coming to understand itself through us, and we have this cosmic responsibility to see that process continues.
That's awesome. Are you familiar with Samuel T. Wilkinson by any chance?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I had the honor of seeing him at Freedom Fest actually a couple days ago, and he's a Yale psychologist. He just wrote a book called Purpose: What Evolution and Human Nature Imply About the Meaning of Our Existence.
I love the title.
And he came to your exact kind of not conclusion, but just general conclusion of, we started with the individual, the selfish, right? The selfish
Mhm.
gene. We spoke of Dawkins and the selfish gene, and it's the
Yeah.
selflessness, the compassion that is going to allow us to actually expand. Because once we start thinking individually, it's great. We got to put a mask on ourselves, but that's only so we can help put the mask on the other person. It's not to let the other person die first so we can live. We need to still follow through with that other part, right? That second part. Perhaps I can get
Exactly.
you two in touch because I do have a podcast upcoming with him, and maybe that might be a very interesting conversation. I can share with you the link to his book or whatever, just so
Yeah,
you can
it
look at it.
sounds really cool. Totally in line
But
with
I just
MITs.
I'm just so grateful for the conversation. Like I said, this week has been absolutely amazing for me. I just am so grateful for you because I'm just starting out here trying to make an impact. And I just want to share your vision. And I got to speak with Michael Schellenberger for 15 minutes, and I got to speak with Brett Weinstein and ask him a question this week. And
That's awesome.
Mihaela Ulieri, I'm sorry, Ulieru, she's an
Nice.
AI person, and
Okay,
Richard.
very
I
cool.
mean, I have talked to all these people, and Bobby, thank you so much.
Yeah, keep doing
It's
what
still
you're
the beginning of my
doing.
crazy week.
It was a lot of
So
fun. I look forward to new episodes, and let's do it
absolutely.
again sometime.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that. I hope we can start a correspondence about those other things you discussed because I think I've got some ideas. I'm like already thinking about ways we can talk about the conspiracy stuff because I've been wanting to do that forever. So I even do some. So Bobby Azarian, thank you again. Do you have any finishing thought, any final thought, last word of wisdom for the youth to let us know where we're going or where we're headed or what we can do?
I think I've shared all my wisdom. I'm always looking for more, but yeah, Road to Omega Substack has all these ideas. I'll be posting something on that meta religion this week. So sign up, subscribe, support the Substack. The more support I get, the more articles I can publish. And yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah, and feel free to use the place from which everything came. Please feel free to use that because I
It's the
found that just to be a
absolute.
great
Yeah,
labelless,
it's
like,
Brahman.
definition
Hey,
of everything, so
it is Brahman. Yeah, check out the Absolute by Hegel and Brahman, and
I
it's
will.
it's the same thing.
Thank you again, Bobby Azarian. Stick around because I just gotta click this and make sure it takes, but
Sure,
thank you again for joining me on Knocked Conscious.
there's
Take
lots of
care.
fun. You too.
1, 2, 3, 4. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say, good night, sweetheart.